I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us for our quick chat here, the discussion on topics regarding ransomware. My name is Tanner Johnson. I'm a principal analyst for data security at Omdia. With me is Israel Barak, CISO of Cybereason. Wanted to just kind of bring to mind some of the primary discussion points and issues facing the market challenges surrounding ransomware. Israel, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today. Ultimately, we've seen a lot of news as of late when it comes to the kind of a resurgence of ransomware. It's been around for a long time, but there appears to be a relative recent resurgence taking place in recent years. What are the particular factors that are leading to this increased prevalence of ransomware attacks?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Tanner. And I think there are probably three primary factors that come to mind when we think about this resurgence, at least to myself. Number one, I think I'm going to call out the resurgence of ransomware as a service providers, right? They're becoming more and more prevalent and more proficient in essentially reducing the entry barrier of new groups into the ransomware market, basically bringing, I think, an unprecedented number of criminal groups and individuals to take part in conducting ransomware attacks. And I think, simply put, ransomware as a service providers make it easier and less risky for people to conduct ransomware attacks by basically creating the technical infrastructure to conduct and to scale ransomware operations, and the level of anonymity and plausible deniability that threat actors enjoy. And I think that's probably the first, I would say, factor that I would call out. The second factor, if I had to choose, would likely be that dramatic success that we're seeing in the market of the double extortion technique in really in gaining monetization, and the subsequent increase in the amount of money in the ransomware market, I think, has been another game changer in really attracting and bringing more and more groups to conduct malicious ransomware activity. Or in other words, I think double extortion is so successful in getting victims to pay and get them to pay much larger ransom sums in return for their data and business service availability and confidentiality, that to a certain extent, it really compels a lot of new threat actors and existing threat actors to shift more and more of their attention and resources into running ransomware operations. And if we were to call out maybe a third factor, I would probably call out the fact that we're seeing with a lot of threat intelligence sources at Cybereason that larger and more sophisticated threat actors are shifting their focus and efforts into conducting more ransomware operations. So if in the past, larger and more sophisticated groups in the cybercrime ecosystem focused significant resources on data theft, stealing banking and credit card information, etc., most of these groups have shifted a lot of their focus into running ransomware attacks. So you're getting much more experienced, much more sophisticated, well-funded groups to drive a lot of growth in the malicious ransomware attacks market. And I would say, maybe as a side note, that probably in addition to these three new factors, there are factors that continue to contribute to this resurgence. They're probably not new, but they're still there as reinforcing factors, including the lack of law enforcement deterrence, right? The remote workforce that in many businesses is lacking proper security controls, and obviously the increase in current and future value of cryptocurrency.
That actually brings up a good point, because I want to bring into discussion the implications of the pandemic on the response. The pandemic was an enormous hurdle for the globe to respond to. As a result, the perimeter had already traditionally been dissolving as a result of just the fluid dynamics of technological markets and capabilities. But the rapid push to remote working from home and remote schooling made the perimeter of a lot of these organizations now include the private networks of their remote employees. So, what would you say is some of the response to lockdowns and how they've introduced threats when it comes to responding, having the resources to address ransomware attacks in real time?
Absolutely. And as you say, I think when it comes to defending against ransomware, really the key is twofold, right? Is one is reducing our attack surface or the opportunity that attackers have to get into our network environments. And the other thing is to dramatically reduce our time to response. So in the event that they are able to get in, we'll be able to rapidly remove them from the environment and really prevent any impact to data or business services. Now, from a COVID perspective, I think the fact that organizations really went dramatically outside of their perimeter, and
Yes.
that employees are often working without the full enterprise security envelope, that organizations have opened access to their network assets from a lot more external places compared to their pre-COVID state. I think that dramatically increased their attack surface, their vulnerability to ransomware threats, and we're seeing multiple ransomware attacks that are able to succeed in gaining that initial access into organizations through these changes that were made in the enterprise architecture and in the way employees and workers connect to the enterprise network in that during and post COVID state. So I think on the one hand, it puts a lot of strain on security leadership and
Yes.
architecture to understand how do we adjust our architecture and our controls to compensate for that rapid transition outside of the traditional perimeter from an identity management perspective, patch management, cyber hygiene in general. How do we provide enterprise grade envelope to these remote employees and lock down these external interfaces that we opened up to allow that remote work and these remote relationships? But on the other hand, it's also a question of how do we extend our detection and response capabilities outside of the enterprise perimeter? If an incident is taking place on a remote employee's asset or in a partner asset, and it's making its way into the core enterprise network through a VPN terminus or some other means,
Mm.
how are we able to effectively detect it and effectively take response and containment actions, even though these edge or these endpoint assets are outside of the VPN or outside of the corporate network? So I think those are certainly key questions that we need to become a lot better in answering.
Oh, absolutely. We need to definitely transition from a reactive society to more of a proactive response to incorporate lessons learned from the past and not repeat them. I want to be cognizant of our time here, but I think a big question being asked back and forth is ultimately with regards to the whether or not to actually pay for a
Mhm.
particular ransom. You get instruction from members of government agencies saying, to pay. It's okay to pay the ransom. Other individuals, security experts, are suggesting that that's not necessarily a guarantee of even receiving your data back, and ultimately could lead to you being whitelisted as a potential target in the future. So, I guess my question to you is, where do you see that the best strategy is making payments, but also looking at the structural changes to address the chaos that is generated during these critical denial of access entities, these sessions?
Of course. Well, our recommendation is of course a priori not to pay the ransom, right? For two primary reasons. First, obviously, that funding this criminal ecosystem is increasing the overall risk across the entire industry, since we're basically fueling more
Hmm.
ransomware activity. But second, that most enterprise organizations that pay the ransom, and we Cybereason actually conducted a survey on this that very recently that encompassed hundreds of enterprise organizations, and one of the findings was that most enterprise organizations that pay the ransom will get hit again. And according to that survey, it's approximately 80% of enterprise organizations that pay the ransom got hit again. I think in
Wow.
particular, and this is to me is a staggering number. Um, I think in particular this is because many organizations that decide to pay the ransom do so because of inherent gaps at the end of the day in their security program, gaps that are often left unfixed, and even after paying the ransom. And I think it's a better investment to put this money towards improvement and maturation of the security program. And it's also important for cyber insurers I think, that are often involved in making ransom payment decisions to support and steer decision makers, even in a case of a ransomware attack, to prefer leveraging their insurance policy towards legitimate recovery efforts and making improvements to the security program as opposed to using their insurance coverage to pay the ransom.
It's wonderful material. I appreciate it. I want to be cognizant of our time, but Israel, been a phenomenal opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate all of our attendees watching, and look forward to interacting with you all again in the future. Again, my name is Tanner Johnson. Thank you for taking the time today. Take care.